Hello, everybody. My name is Reagan, and this is going to be the beginning of a series where I go through the book of Daniel, and we're going to be focusing on the later chapters from 7 all the way to 12. And we're going to be connecting the prophecies and the visions within these chapters to the historical relevance and what I believe is the historical fulfillment of almost all of these visions and prophetic prophecies that we have been given. So we're going to start in chapter 7 here, and we're going to go verse by verse. A lot of the work that has been done that I've been able to put forth to you today was presented to me by a man named Dan Bruce in a book that you can get online called Daniel Unsealed. By far the most credible interpretation of the book of Daniel when it comes to the prophecies and visions that I have seen yet. So to begin chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, we can actually split chapter 7 into three distinct parts. The first one being part 1, which are from verses 1 to 12. Now, this spans from the rise of the first kingdom to the ending of the term defined by a season and a time. The second distinct timeline simply describes the everlasting kingdom, and this is from verses 13 to 14, 18, and 27. So it's broken up a little bit within the chapter. So part 3 details the rise of the fourth kingdom to the conclusion of the time period defined by times, time, and half a time. Although this chapter can be broken into the three distinct timelines, the visions intermingle with one another, and we will find scriptures within each part pertaining to each other. A bit of historical background here. So the book of Daniel takes place during the late 6th century BC. The exact dates of when the book was written falls into two categories. It's either the late 6th century BC or the early 2nd century BC. Just due to manuscript evidence of having physical copies. They mostly date back to 2nd century BC at the farthest. However, given the fulfillment of the predictive chronology of the dreams and the visions, for me, it is safe to regard the late 6th century as the date in which the books was written, and we get that date because it's the date that we're about to see here is where the chapter starts and the book is dated to by what Daniel says. So starting off chapter 7, we see that Daniel writes down that he wrote his vision in the first year of Belshazzar, which can be dated near 553 BC, near the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire ranged from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, parts of Arabia, and into Egypt. So it was a very vast empire for its day. Now in 539 BC, Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, initiating a Persian rule over the region. We can see back in Isaiah 44:28 to 45:1 is a prophecy of Cyrus the Great. So 28 says, "It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple, your foundation will be laid. Thus says the Lord to Cyrus his anointed, whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him, and to loose the loins of kings, to open doors before him, so that gates will not be shut." So a prophecy from Isaiah comes about Cyrus the Great, and in about 539 BC we see that Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon. So now we have a reference of the time period that we're in. We're about the time of Cyrus the Great within the vision. And so within chapter 7, we have this vision of the four beasts. And so seeing as the Achaemenid Empire is the most immediate empire after Daniel's time, it makes sense that we start with this empire. Now we're going to jump into verse 3 to 7a. And so it starts with, "And four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle, I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. The first 3 beasts represent the kings, starting with Cyrus the Great, from 546 BC to 530 BC. The second beast would be Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, who would have reigned right after Cyrus from 530 BC to 522 BC. And the third would have been Smerdis or Bardia, son of Cyrus, who would have reigned 522 BC to 521 BC. History then shows us that Smerdis or Bardia is then killed by Darius Hystaspes, initiating the start of the Darian dynasty. The 4th beast within this vision would have been Darius, the first Hystaspes. He had killed the 3rd beast, which would have been Smerdis or Bardia, taking the throne for himself. So Darius the Great crossed the Bosporus in the year 512, expanded the Persian Empire into Europe, initiated 2 centuries of Greco-Persian hostilities, defeated at the Battle of Marathon in 490, the Second Temple dedicated in Jerusalem in 515. So now we're going to go through the 10 kings of the Darian dynasty, which would be the 10 horns of the 4th beast. So I might butcher some of these names. I apologize in advance. The second king would have been Xerxes I. He invaded Greece, defeated Greek army at the Battle of Thermopylae, burned the city of Athens and the Acropolis. Artaxerxes I. Egypt revolted, empire declined. Artaxerxes II, killed by Sogdianus. Sogdianus took his place, was then killed by Darius II. Darius II, troubled times in Egypt, the renegade Jewish temple at Elephantine destroyed, and then we have Artaxerxes II, oversaw the further decline of the empire. Artaxerxes III initiated minor resurgence of the Persian Empire, Egypt reconquered. Then we have Artaxerxes IV, battled Philip II of Macedonia, and then we have Darius III, who deposed Artaxerxes IV, later defeated by Alexander the Great at Granicus River 331, Issus River 333, and Gaugamela 331. Last king of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And I believe this is a typo because Granicus should have been 334, not 331. I believe that was a typo. Now we will be moving on, going through Daniel 7, 7b to 8, jumping to 24 and 24b. So verse 7b and 24 clarify the 4th beast being a kingdom of 10 kings, and that a king will rise up after these 10 kings. So Daniel 7, 7b says, And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So now we look at 8. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. So we see in 7b and 8 that we're going to have a king that is different than the previous kings. So the first 3 beasts, which were first 3 kings, were Cyrus the Great and his 2 sons. And then Darius comes, kills Cyrus's second son, who was the third beast, and initiates his dynasty of 10 kings, which were the 10 horns. And then verse 8 talks about another horn that comes up, and little horn come up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possesses eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. So if we jump over to 24 of the same chapter, it gives us a little bit of an explanation. So as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise. We went through the 10 kingdoms. And another one will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. Verse 24b was describing the rise of Alexander the Great. So after these 10 kings, another one will rise, and he will subdue 3 kings. So I believe this is the description, or this description is not meant to be 3 literal kings, but the 3 commanders of Darius III's armies. Alexander was victorious on 3 specific occasions. The Battle of Granicus in 334 BC, the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, and the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. So within this interpretation and this perspective of the book of Daniel, whenever we are looking at the scripture and there is a semicolon in there, we have to look at it with as a division. So within the same prophecy or the same vision, it could indicate a division of time. It could indicate a division from the main idea talking about an individual to another individual, even another time period. So that's something to keep in mind when we see these semicolons within the text. For instance, whereas verse 24b and verse 8a are talking about Alexander the Great, verse 8b and 25a are talking about Antiochus Epiphanes IV, jumping roughly 164 years later. So here we have that one individual semicolon. Now we're talking about another individual, but we're also talking about a different time period as well. Giving a little rundown of 24, 25, and 8. So when we talk about 24b, talking about Alexander, and verse 8a, talking about Alexander, 8a will be, while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and the 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. So that is 8a. We then have a semicolon, and it is split into then 8b, which is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes IV. So 8b is, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. So that's something that we'll remember, the description here, and we'll come back to it afterwards. When we go to 24b, 24a, as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise. So that's talking about the Darian dynasty. And then 24b talks about, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. So there's that subduing 3 kings. We're talking about Alexander again when he defeated Darius 3 times at those 3 different battles. So then we go into verse 25b. 25b then goes on to describe they being given over to his hand for a time, times, and a half time. And there has been for a long time a ongoing discussion of what time, times, and half a time means. Most of the consensus is a 3.5 year time period. Issue that I've always had with that is there was nothing in history that we could attribute to this 3.5 years time period, and so it was always thought to be in the future times half a time. What we're going to present to you today is the alternative, which fits history perfectly. And that's why I love this entire perspective and interpretation of Daniel, is because everything within the book of Daniel, minus the day of the Lord scriptures and the coming of Christ, his second advent, other than the very end of times visions within Daniel, that you can attribute all of it to history, and we're going to show you that. Quickly, we're going to talk about verse 25a. Verse 25b is where where we're going to go into in a moment here, is they being given over to his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But 25a, we are talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and I will read it out here. And he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. So if we go back to 8b, and we hear, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. We also see that happening over here. Speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. And when we actually look into the history of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, we see that he made Hellenism the official religion. He outlawed Judaism. He slaughtered pigs on the altar. So he viciously persecuted the Jews and actually intended to make these alterations in times and in law, and made it very, very, very difficult for the Jewish people to be practicing their faith in that time. So now when we look at verse 25b, we then see, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So they are the Jews. His hand would be the Romans. During the reign of Antiochus, the Epiphanes, the Maccabees, one of the Jewish leaders during that time, led a revolt against the Seleucid king, and in 161 BC, the Maccabees gained a victory over Nicanor, a Seleucid military leader. Now, being afraid of the might of the entire military of the Seleucid kingdom, Judah Maccabee sent an envoy to Rome to ask for help against the Seleucid. This event fulfilled the prophecy in verse 25, they being the Jews, given into his hand being Rome. So when we look at 2 Chronicles 16, 7-9, we'll see that the Israelites were not trusting in God. So let's read this. So 7 and 9 of chapter 16 of 2 Chronicles. At that time, Hanani the seer came to Asa king of Judah and said to him, because you have relied on the king of Aram and have not relied on the Lord your God, therefore the army of the king of Aram has escaped out of your hand. Were not the Ethiopians and the Lubim an immense army with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because you relied on the Lord, he delivered them into your hand. For the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. You have acted foolishly in this. Indeed, from now on you will surely have wars. So we see in this time the Maccabees were given a victory over the Seleucids, but then they sent the envoy to Rome and were not trusting in the Lord to continue giving them these victories. So now we come to the phrase time, times, and half a time, which is referring to the period of time in which the Roman Byzantine Empire would rule over the Jews. So traditionally, like we had said before, Bible scholars have interpreted this phrase as a period of 3.5 years. However, like I said, this just doesn't add up historically. Instead, we are to understand the setting in which Daniel, the author of this book, was living in while writing the book. So Dan Bruce goes into more detail in his book, and like I said, if you ever want to read it, you can find it online for free. I will put it in the details of the description of the video when I upload this. But he goes to show that a time refers to the Babylonian tradition of subtracting a day every 228 years in order to keep the agricultural society in line with Passover. Thus, instead of 3.5 years, we can interpret this passage as 798 years or Passovers. So now we can take time, times, and half a time, and when we add them together, we get the 798. And I know this sounds very obscure, very foreign to all of the other ways and interpretations that we've had over the years. But stick with me, and I promise by the end of this series, you will see just how well everything fits together. Now we're going to jump over to 7, 9 through 12. We're going to read through this, and then we're going to go over the general theme of these verses. And so verses 9 and 10 describe the glory of Jesus on the throne in heaven, potentially painting the scene of the final judgment of mankind. So chapter 7, verse 9 starts with, I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vestures was like white snow, and his hair and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words, which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. Verse 11 is speaking about Antiochus Epiphanes. He is speaking boastful words towards God until he dies. Verse 12 then gives us another period of time when their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Now I'm reading the NASB version or translation, and when we see season and a time, that comes from King James. So when I read was granted to them for an appointed period of time, appointed period can also be translated as season. So we're looking season and appointed period kind of interchangeably at this point. But the point is we are then given this other period of time. So we got to focus on their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. In Deuteronomy 32, 46 to 47, it teaches us that when the Jews kept the commandments of the Lord while they were in the promised land, then they received prolonged lives in the land. There, in this passage, is about the Jews in the promised land. Mattathias and his 5 sons revolted against Antiochus Epiphanes in 166 BC, liberated the Temple Mount in 164 BC, and rededicated it to God the same year. In 163 BC, the Seleucid Empire declared religious freedom to the Jews in order to create stability in the region, since the Seleucid army was needed elsewhere to fight other enemies. And in 162 BC, the Jewish leaders in Judea issued a decree to observe the law in the land, initiating the season and a time of prolonged life. So when we look back at the scripture and we see their lives, this means the lives of the Jews in the land. And depending on the translation that you have, for myself, but an extension of life was granted to them. So the them is the Jews were the Jews that were living in the land. A season in this situation would be 1 year of Jewish festivals. So appointed period in my translation would be the same as season in the King James Version. And so ultimately it just means 1 year of Jewish festivals. Now, using the same method that we used to determine the time, times, and half a time, we are using for this determination of time. So we equal that to 228 years, And when we add in a season and a time, that comes out to 229 years. 161 BC would have been the first year which the Jews living in the land would have been able to observe the law and all of the festivals. So if we take the 229 years from 161 BC, which is when the law was observed in the land from start to end of the year, we find ourselves at 67 AD, when the Great Diaspora happens, which is the dispersion of the Jews, which then led to the destruction of the temple, the Maccabean Wars, and so on. But we have that 229-year separation from 161 BC, ends in 67 AD, ending their prolonged life in the land. So now we have the final time period within Daniel 7, which starts from the time of the vision of Daniel 7, and it is ongoing. It's eternal, because it talks about the coming of the Son of Man, coming of Christ, and his eternal kingdom. So starting in verse 13, we'll go 13, 14, 18, 27. So 13, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Verse 18 is, but the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. And 27, then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. Verses 13 to 14, we see one like a son of man coming up to the Ancient of Days. These verses represent Jesus being given the kingdom of heaven to rule over. In verse 18, it reassures believers that we will receive the kingdom of heaven, and suffering is only temporary. And verse 27, the kingdom of heaven will never be destroyed and will last forever, and all will obey Christ as king. And then to sum up the entire chapter, we have verse 28, and that ends with Daniel being physically ill from the visions in which he witnessed, knowing his people would once again live in Jerusalem and worship at the temple, just to have it destroyed again and have the Jews dispersed among the nations. Like, just imagine a Jew who's living in exile gets the visions of his people returning, and they have this prolonged period of life living in the land, and they have their temple, and he gets to see the Roman Empire in this vision absolutely destroy the temple, disperse the Jews, and it's made him physically ill. But we are left with hope intermingled with the visions. We have the visions of the return of Christ, the coming of the kingdom. So all is not lost. But when we read 28, and we'll be able to see his concern here, it's at this point the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, but I kept the matter to myself. Physically ill because of what he saw. So here is a visual aid for two of the three timelines put forth in chapter 7. The first one being in verse 25, where we are told they're given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. And we've pointed out that that's the Roman Byzantine Empire that then took dominion over the Jews. So using the time explanation that Dan Bruce puts forth, we can then calculate the time, times, and half a time to be 798 years, or Passovers. And why we say Passover is in our chapter 8 walkthrough, we'll go over why we come to the idea of it being Passovers. So when we take that 798 years and we go from 161 BC, we get the Roman Byzantine Empire takes control then, and 798 years later, 637 AD, the Islamic Caliphate took dominion over the Jews and Judea. So we see perfectly that in this time frame, we have the Roman Byzantine Empire ruling over Judea, over the Jews, and once the 798 years is over, we then have the Islamic Caliphate taking over, which fully is a fulfillment of given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. And then we have prolonged for a season and a time. And earlier in the video, I had mentioned that the timeline starts at 161. I misspoke on that. We actually start the timeline at 162. So from the decree of the Jews saying they're to observe the law and the festivals in Israel, we go from 162 BC and we go forward with the prolonged for a season and a time, which taking the principle of time being 228 years and a season being a full 1 year of festivals and observing the law, then we come to 229 years or Passovers. And exactly 229 years after 162 BC, we land on 67 AD, which is the Romans crushing the Jewish revolt, and they began to disperse the Jews from Israel. So their prolonged life in the land was over. So that sums up our chapter 7 review. I'm super excited that you stayed through the entire video and that you got to look at all this information. Again, I personally believe this is the best explanation historically for chapter 7, and we'll continue to go into chapter 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 as well. And don't forget, don't take anything that I say in here as authoritative or as it's inerrant from me or that I can't be wrong, because this could be entirely incorrect. However, for me, it just doesn't seem like it would be because of how well it lines up with history. So don't take my word for any of this. Do your own research. Do your own diving into the scripture. Do it prayerfully. Let the Spirit guide you, and just double check everything. Don't take the word of man. Let the Lord guide you through your studies, as I have absolutely allowed the Lord to take over my studies and guide me. And this is why I've come to this conclusion, to this information is definitely through prayerful study. Anyway, I will see you in our next series. Thank you for watching, and I am super excited for the future.